of Matthew chapter 5. John Hambley, James Montgomery, Boyce, and Don Stamps were some of the ministers who have information in this that I got, as well as Watch List and Global Persecution List. So those are some of my things I'd use for the preparation of this service. Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 through 12, it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Now you might be thinking, it's Independence Day. What does this have to do with Independence Day? Well, hopefully by the end of this you'll understand the connection. If I've done my job well, you'll understand the connection of why I chose this scripture for Independence Day. And I want to talk about, this verse talks about persecution. And persecution has been a reality for the Christian church since the very beginning. We see it in the book of Acts. We see the first martyr ever killed for their Christian faith in Stephen. We know that Christians suffer extreme persecution. During the first century, almost every disciple suffered martyrdom, was killed for the sake of Jesus, except for John. Multiple thousands lost their lives in the first 300 years of Christianity. But I want you to know it didn't stop in the first century. There is still persecution going on today. Now listen to this. 1 in 7 Christians in the world are under extreme persecution today. 1 in 7. That means 1 in 7 Christians are under persecution that is so severe that it may cause imprisonment or death. 1 in 7. That equals about 400 million Christians in the world today who are still going through the types of persecution that we saw in the New Testament church. There's a watch list for the worst countries for persecution of Christians, always trying to force those countries to do better. And we have that list up here, I believe. More than 400 million Christians suffering high level of persecution and discrimination for their faith. 1 in 7. Now that's none of us in this room. So we represent, if you look at this room and there's 1 in 7, that means we represent a lot of Christians out there who are. And the next one says that the worst countries, the worst offenders, North Korea, not surprising underneath that regime, Somalia, Yemen, Eritrea, Libya, Nigeria, Iran. Afghanistan had moved from 2nd all the way down to 8th now. And some of you might have said, well, what were we doing in Afghanistan? We didn't do any good at all. But the persecution of Christians in Afghanistan has moved their country from 2nd on this list behind North Korea down to 8th. Sudan, and this one surprised me because this is in our hemisphere. Colombia in South America is 22, Cuba is 27, and Mexico right now is 38th. Now they list the top 50 in the world of over 200 countries, and these countries where severe persecution occurs. Well, what does that persecution look like today? Islamic terrorists killed 37 students on June 16th of this year. They invaded a Christian school, invading their dormitories at night. They killed 37, kidnapped 6 others. And I know this sounds brutal, but it says that they hacked the girls with machetes, and they blocked the boys' dorm and burnt the dorm to the ground. That was in June 16th of this year. One of the attackers said the school is propagating Christianity in Uganda and getting support from the Christians in the West. Islam should be the dominant religion, and therefore they must be stopped. In under 6 months of 2023, according to the website, over 2,300 defenseless Christians were hacked to death in Nigeria. Now think of that. In this year alone, 2,300 were hacked to death in Nigeria. You look down that list, where's Nigeria? 6th. Now in that same time, in Nigeria, since 2015, over 31,000 Christians have been killed for their faith in Nigeria since 2015, and they're 6th on the list. In that same time in Nigeria, according to the International Society reports, it says that over 18,000 churches have been burned, 2,200 Christian schools have been burned down, and over 10,000 Christian communities have been sacked and pillaged, with over 50 million Christians uprooted and made homeless. That's hard to believe that happens in our world yet today. Yet you rarely see any reports on it in the media. You rarely hear anybody in the media talk about it. A big offender who isn't even on this list is India, where Pastor Tim and Carla Shamala are. And one of the things is we're huge trading partners with India, so we don't see any of that spread in the media. They don't want people to hear that. But in India right now, there is a huge persecution of Christians, and they are being killed, they are being looted, they are being violently attacked, destroying homes and burning churches, and the government isn't doing anything about it. There has been a report that 44 churches have been attacked or burned down in just a 48-hour period in India. In one extreme period of this year, 44 churches were burned down or attacked in 48 hours. More than 5,600 Christians were killed for their faith in that country. And more than 2,100 churches were attacked. Now, how does this deal with our country? There's a lot of people who speak very negatively about our country today. And our country is not perfect. But how many people know our country wasn't perfect in 1776? If you want to know, just ask those who were slaves in our country in 1776. Ask those who were poor. Ask the women who were not allowed to vote or have a say in anything. Our country wasn't perfect then, and our country isn't perfect now. Sometimes we tend to look back with rose-colored glasses and think, well, everything was better back then, but they had problems back then. But one thing our country does today that I am very grateful for is it gives me the freedom to worship and serve Christ without fear of death for my faith. When you look at these other countries and the fact that 1 in 7 Christians are fearful of death because of their faith, we are so blessed. We are so blessed that we have a country that allows us. Now, are there problems in our country? Yes. And there are problems that our country needs Christians to stand up and make right. There are problems in this country that we need to protect people and we need to do the right thing. But I am grateful for our nation because we can come together on Sunday morning and we can worship. And the government isn't coming in and arresting and killing and looting and pillaging or allowing others to do that. Because when we look at this scripture in the Beatitudes, we see the fact that there is persecution for righteousness. Now, I ran across this because I was doing a series on the Beatitudes in the jail, and this one really stuck out to me. So let's just read that again from Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely for my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets that were before you. The first thing we see is that we know the certainty of persecution. Persecution is not if, persecution is when. We already see an increase of persecution in our country for Christians, but there are going to be more and more pressure and persecution. There's going to be more and more pressure and persecution coming in our nation against Christians. And we are very blessed that we are safe here, but we're not suffering yet as much as these other people do. And we are grateful for our nation, but it is our job to keep our nation free for the generation coming after us. It is our job as American citizens to vote and to stand up and to do all we can so that our country will be free for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids to be able to worship here. We had the message this morning from the Lord that the time is coming closer and closer. And as the time of the rapture gets closer and closer, as the end time gets closer and closer, the Bible clearly says persecution is going to increase. It's going to increase. It's not if, it's a matter of it will increase. So Christianity will see more and more persecution. John chapter 15, if you want to turn there with me. Leave your finger in Matthew there, 5. We're going to turn to John 15. Verse 18 of John chapter 15. John 15, 18. And it says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I have said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. So Jesus is saying here that it's not if you are persecuted for my name, it's when you are persecuted for my name. It's going to happen. And the question we should be asking ourselves is, am I prepared for that type of stand for Christ? If 6 months, a year from now, it seems like it'd be impossible. But if the persecution going on in Nigeria and in India were to come to America, am I at a spiritual place where I am ready to stand for my faith, and I am ready to stand for Christ, even if it means my life? Because that's when we're going to find out who are just part of a social club compared to those who are truly committed to Jesus Christ. When that persecution comes, we have to ask ourselves, am I ready for what is coming? The persecution is coming. But I love that this verse here tells us that when the persecution comes, according to Matthew chapter 11, it says you are blessed. Meaning you are greatly to receive blessing and favor when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. You are greatly blessed when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Now that doesn't even seem like that is something that we could say, but the fact is that this is a blessing along with all the other Beatitudes. In fact, this is even more so. There are 5 facts that make this beatitude impossible to ignore. First, it was the last one in the list. How many people know if you tell your kids a list of things before you leave, you better put the most important thing what? Last. Because what are they going to remember? The last thing. So we see here that in this list, the last thing he says is, blessed are you when others persecute you for righteousness. Not only is it a last, it's the longest one, because he says it in verse 10, and then he continues to reiterate it, to restate it in verse 11, and he is the only one that he not only says there is a blessing with it, but there's also a requirement with it. What is the requirement with it? It says, rejoice. Not only are we blessed when we are persecuted, we are to rejoice when we are persecuted. Now, that's a tough thing to do, but I have heard stories from people standing in the face of death for Christ, and they said, God gave me strength I did not even know I could have. God kept me from ever wanting to denounce him. God was there with me, and I did not stand alone. This beatitude was repeated by Jesus. It is the one that also, if you notice, it says, blessed are the, blessed are the, blessed are the. And in verse 10, it says, blessed are the persecuted. But in verse 11, it says, blessed are you. He wanted everybody to understand that this is personal. This is for you directly. He said, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are you when you are persecuted. It is going to happen. You are going to be persecuted for righteousness' sake. We know it, and it is true. But the question is, are we ready for it? Are we ready to stand against the evil that could happen? Blessed are you. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, because you are chosen to be one who could suffer as Christ suffered. It says, if the Master, me, Christ, suffered, how are you to be greater than me and not also have to suffer? So the question is, are we ready? Am I ready? Is this just a social thing? Am I just coming to church because others have come to church before me, my family's come to church before me, or am I ready to truly face death for Christ? Am I ready to give up my job for Jesus Christ? Am I ready to lose my home for Jesus Christ? Am I ready to lose my reputation in the community with others for Jesus Christ? Is this something I'm truly committed to, or merely just something that I'm going along with? The story of the farmer, I've shared it before. All the animals are very excited because the farmer has taken such good care of them. And they decided that since it was the farmer's birthday, they all wanted to do something nice for him. And so the cow said, well, I can give some milk for the farmer for his breakfast. And the chicken said, well, I can give some eggs for the farmer for his breakfast. And they all looked at the pig. See, for the cow and for the chicken, it was just a nice offering. But for the pig, it was all in, all or nothing. He couldn't give just some bacon. He had to give his whole life. There's a lot of people sitting in American churches today who are okay if they're the cow or the chicken. But the day is coming when we're going to have to decide if we're willing to be the pig. Now, you didn't think you'd hear me say, are you willing to be a pig today? Did you? That's not what you thought would come out of Pastor's mouth this morning. Are you willing to be a pig? Are you willing to make a full commitment to Christ? Are you willing to stand for Him even if it means your life? We should be willing to take a stand, and to stand with joy, and to stand before Christ and know. Third, when we take that stand and we take that position, it says that we have to rejoice and be exceedingly glad. No, you can't just do it and act like a child who is sulking. You can't do it and lick your own wounds in self-pity. You can't do it and throw yourself a pity party. You can't even do it and say, well, I'm tough, I'll grin and bear it. It says, no, you must literally rejoice. See, because the New Testament church, when they were persecuted, they said, I am so glad that I have been found worthy to suffer for Christ. Oh, that I could just be found worthy to suffer for Him. That's amazing that they had this heart, this attitude that said that I will suffer for Christ. And here's how they did it. How could they be rejoicing? And we're just going to go through these quick. It says, we rejoice because it demonstrates our identity with Christ. We rejoice because it refines us. According to 1 Peter chapter 1, it talks about it refining us as if by fire. We rejoice because it gives us opportunity to show the difference that Christ makes in our life, that it is a witness to other people. We rejoice when we're persecuted because it affects other lives for eternity. We rejoice when we're persecuted because we know that it comes with a promise of reward. It's not an end to itself. It's only a short while, and then the end shall come and the reward shall come. We rejoice when we're persecuted because we know that we are nearer to Christ than we ever have been before. That's how, as a Christian, we can rejoice even in the midst of severe persecution. So the question today is, are you ready? Are you ready should persecution to that degree come today? Are you ready to make that commitment? Are you just going along with it? Or if your friends really put the pressure on you, would you say, I'm not backing down? Are you just going along with it? Or when your boss tells you to lie, would you say, no, I'll have to quit my job because I can't lie? Are you just going along with it? Or when they come for your family and say, renounce Christ, are you willing to say, I can't renounce Christ? Because there's a big difference between being a cow and being a pig. And there's a commitment there that says, no matter what, I will stand for Christ. Let us pray. Your heads bowed.